The morning of October 14, 2187, started like any other morning in Denver, Colorado. Marcus Webb woke up at 6 in the morning just like he always did. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with short brown hair that had started going gray at the temples. He was 42 years old and he had spent the last 18 years working for the United Earth Defense Command, a branch of government that most people on Earth knew existed but hoped they would never actually need. Marcus sat up in bed and looked out the window of his apartment on the 14th floor. The city was already humming with life below. Delivery drones buzzed between buildings. The MagRail transit line that ran through the center of Denver was already packed with early commuters. Children were walking to school with their parents, carrying backpacks, laughing, pointing at things in shop windows. He watched all of it for a moment before standing up. His daughter Lily was still asleep in her room down the hall. She was 16 years old and had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn jaw. She had a science test today, Marcus remembered. He had quizzed her on molecular biology the night before at the dinner table while she rolled her eyes and told him he was pronouncing half the words wrong. He smiled at the memory, walked into the kitchen and started making coffee. The apartment was quiet and warm. Outside, the sun was just starting to come up over the Rocky Mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Marcus poured his coffee, sat down at the kitchen table and pulled up the morning news feed on his tablet. The headlines stopped him cold. Unidentified objects detected in outer solar system. Earth Defense Command monitoring situation. Marcus put down his coffee mug. He read the article quickly. 3 large objects, the article called them anomalies, had been detected just past the orbit of Neptune. They were not moving on any natural trajectory. They were not asteroids. They were not comets. They were not any kind of space debris that Earth's tracking systems had ever seen before. They were moving in a deliberate, straight line toward the inner solar system. Toward Earth. Marcus set the tablet down on the kitchen table and looked out the window again. The city below was still going about its morning routine, completely unaware. The delivery drones were still buzzing. The MagRail was still running. Children were still walking to school. His phone buzzed on the counter. He already knew what it was going to say before he even picked it up. He had worked in Earth Defense Command long enough to recognize the feeling in his chest, that cold, heavy pressure that settled in just below the sternum whenever something real was happening. He read the message. All senior personnel report to UDC headquarters immediately. This is not a drill. Marcus Webb set the phone down on the counter, took one long, slow breath, and then walked down the hallway to his daughter's room. He pushed the door open gently. Lily was curled up under her blankets, her dark hair spread across the pillow. "Hey," he said quietly. "Hey Lily. Wake up." She stirred. "Dad, it's not even." "I know," he said. "I have to go into work early today. There's food in the fridge. Call your Aunt Janet if you need anything." "Okay." Lily opened one eye and looked at him. She was a smart girl. She had always been able to read her father the way other kids read comic books. Quickly, completely, understanding every word. Something in his face made her sit up in bed. "Dad," she said. "What's wrong?" "Nothing yet," he said honestly. "I'll call you later." He kissed her on the top of the head, grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door and walked out of the apartment. The United Earth Defense Command headquarters was built into the side of Cheyenne Mountain, just south of Colorado Springs. It had been there, in various forms, for over 200 years. First as NORAD, then as the North American Aerospace Defense Agency, then as humanity slowly pushed out into space and the reality of what might be out there became impossible to ignore, as the UEDC. The facility had been massively expanded and modernized over the decades. It was now a complex of underground levels stretching nearly a kilometer into the mountain, equipped with the most advanced sensor arrays, communication systems, and command infrastructure that humanity had ever built. It was designed to function as the nerve center of Earth's defense during any kind of existential level threat. Marcus arrived at the main security checkpoint at 7:15 in the morning. The parking lot was already packed. He recognized cars belonging to senior personnel he had not seen in person in months. People who worked remotely, people who were stationed at off-world posts on the Moon or Mars colonies, people who only came to this facility when something serious was happening. The mood inside the mountain was electric in the worst possible way. People were moving fast. Voices were low and tight. Nobody was making eye contact unnecessarily. Marcus walked through the corridors, showing his badge at 3 separate checkpoints, until he reached the main command level, a massive circular room filled with holographic display screens, sensor feeds, and a central operations table the size of a small house. General Diana Reyes was already at the table. She was 60 years old, with silver hair cut short and sharp brown eyes that didn't miss anything. She had been the commander of Earth Defense Command for 7 years, and in that time she had handled every kind of crisis imaginable: orbital debris events, rogue asteroid near misses, a civil war on the Mars colonies that had nearly spiraled into full-scale military conflict. She was the kind of person who got calmer the more dangerous things became, and that quality had saved lives more times than anyone could count. She looked up when Marcus walked in. "Good," she said. "You're here. Come look at this." Marcus walked to the central table and looked at the holographic display floating above it. 3 objects, roughly triangular in shape based on the sensor data. Each one approximately 6 kilometers long. They were arranged in a loose formation, one leading, 2 flanking slightly behind. They were moving at a speed that made Marcus's stomach drop when he read the number. "That's," he started. "30% of the speed of light," General Reyes said. "Yes." Marcus stared at the display. "Nothing we've ever built moves that fast." "Correct. How long until they reach the inner solar system?" "At their current speed, they'll cross the orbit of Jupiter in approximately 9 days, said a voice from the other side of the table. Marcus looked up. Dr. Priya Nair was standing there, her dark eyes fixed on the holographic display with an expression that was somewhere between scientific excitement and pure terror. She was the head of the UEDC's Xenological Research Division, the department responsible for analyzing potential extraterrestrial contact. She was 38 years old, with long black hair pulled back in a loose braid, and she had spent most of her career publishing detailed papers about first contact protocols that her colleagues in other departments had generally treated as interesting theoretical exercises. Nobody was treating them as theoretical anymore. "Have we tried to contact them?" Marcus asked. "We've been broadcasting on every frequency we know of since the objects were first detected 6 hours ago," Dr. Nair said. "No response so far." "What about their behavior? Have they made any aggressive moves?" "No," she said. "They've been completely passive. No energy emissions that we can identify as weapons. No course changes. They're just coming." Marcus looked at the display for a long moment. "What's the public situation?" "The story has already broken," General Reyes said, her voice level. "We couldn't suppress it. Too many civilian tracking stations picked up the same data. The president is briefing the UN Security Council in 3 hours. After that, it'll be a full public announcement." "How are people reacting?" "How do you think?" she said. "We're monitoring social feeds. Some people are panicking. Some people are excited. A lot of people are pretending it isn't happening." She paused. "The stock markets opened 2 hours ago and immediately went into free fall." Marcus nodded slowly. He turned back to the display and stared at the 3 objects moving silently through the outer darkness of the solar system. 6 kilometers long each. Moving at 30% of the speed of light. No communication. No weapons activity. Just coming. Just coming straight toward Earth. "What do we know about who they are?" he asked quietly. Dr. Nair was quiet for a moment. "Nothing," she said. "Not yet. But their technology is so far beyond anything we've developed that trying to compare it to ours would be like a passenger ship from the year 1800 trying to understand how a nuclear submarine works." She paused. "Whatever they are not here by accident." Marcus Webb looked at the holographic display, at those 3 slow, steady, implacable shapes moving through the black of space toward the planet where his daughter was getting ready for a science test she no longer had any reason to worry about. "No," he said. "They are not." The public announcement came at noon. President Elena Vos stood at the podium in the White House briefing room, flanked by the UN Secretary General and the heads of the major space agencies. She was a compact woman in her mid-50s with silver-streaked hair and the calm, measured presence of someone who had spent decades in public service. She spoke clearly and without flinching. She told the world that 3 large unidentified craft had been detected in the outer solar system. She told the world that they were of apparent artificial construction and that they were moving toward the inner solar system on a trajectory that would bring them close to Earth. She told the world that every communication channel available had been used to attempt contact and that no response had yet been received. She told the world that Earth's defense forces were on full alert and that all available resources were being mobilized. She told the world to stay calm. The world did not stay calm. By 2 in the afternoon, every major city on Earth was in some degree of chaos. Not violent chaos, not yet, but the nervous, fractured, disorienting chaos of 8 billion people all trying to process the same impossible information at the same time. People crowded churches and temples and mosques. People pulled their children out of school. People tried to book flights to remote locations, as if distance from a major city would somehow matter when facing ships 6 kilometers long. People held each other on sidewalks and in parks and in the middle of grocery stores and simply looked up at the sky. In Denver, Lily Webb sat on the roof of her father's apartment building with her best friend, Rosa, and looked up at the sky too. The sky was bright blue, completely clear, completely normal. "Do you think they're going to hurt us?" Rosa asked. Lily thought about it carefully, the way her father had always taught her to think about difficult questions, not rushing to an answer, not letting fear do the thinking for her. "I don't know," she said. "But I think if they just wanted to destroy us, they would have done it already. They're too advanced not to have that option. So maybe they want something else." "Maybe," Lily said. "The question is what?" Inside Cheyenne Mountain, that was the exact question that the best minds on Earth were trying to answer. By the end of the first day, Dr. Nair's team had compiled everything humanity knew about the possibility of extraterrestrial contact. Every theory, every scientific paper, every signal anomaly ever recorded, and were running it all through the most powerful analysis systems in existence, looking for anything that might give them a clue about who was out there and what they wanted. They found nothing useful. The objects, which the media had started calling the arrivals, continued on their straight, steady, silent course. No communications. No weapons. No course changes. Just coming. Marcus worked through the night. He drank bad coffee and studied sensor feeds and attended briefing after briefing in the cold fluorescent light of the command center. At 3 in the morning he stepped out into the corridor for a few minutes and called Lily. She answered on the second ring. "I'm okay, Dad," she said before he could ask. "I'm at home. I'm fine." "Good," he said. "Are you scared?" "A little," she admitted. "Are you?" He was quiet for a moment. "A little," he said. "What are you going to do?" "My job," he said. "Same as always." There was a pause. "Dad," Lily said quietly. "Whatever they are, whatever they want, promise me you'll try to understand them before you start shooting at them." Marcus Webb stood in the corridor of Cheyenne Mountain 40 stories underground, with the weight of the entire world pressing down from above, and he thought about his daughter's face in the morning light. "I promise," he said. He meant it. He just didn't know yet how hard that promise was going to be to keep. The arrivals crossed the orbit of Saturn on day 4. By that point, Earth's response was fully mobilized. Every military satellite in orbit had been brought to full readiness. Every ground-based defense battery from New York to Shanghai to Mumbai had been activated. The 6 existing orbital defense platforms, massive structures in high Earth orbit that had been built during the Mars colony conflicts and never actually used in combat, had been brought online for the first time. Humanity's entire military capability, formidable by its own standards, was pointed at the sky and holding its breath. The arrivals did not slow down. They did not change course. They did not respond to any of the hundreds of communication signals Earth had been broadcasting continuously. On day 5 something new happened. Dr. Nair was in her lab on level 12 of the UEDC facility, working on her latest analysis of the arrival's energy signatures, when her signal monitoring system lit up like a Christmas tree. She sat forward so fast she knocked her coffee off the desk. "This is Dr. Nair in Xenological Research," she said quickly into her comm. "I need General Reyes and Director Webb in my lab immediately. I'm receiving a transmission." Marcus was there in 4 minutes. General Reyes arrived 30 seconds later. They crowded around Dr. Nair's workstation, which was displaying a waveform unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. Dense, layered, complex in ways that made his head hurt slightly just looking at it. "Where is it coming from?" General Reyes asked. "The lead craft," Dr. Nair said. Her hands were trembling slightly, and she pressed them flat on the desk to make them stop. "It's broadcasting on a frequency we've been listening to, we just weren't parsing it correctly. The signal has been there since before they crossed Saturn's orbit. We missed it because the encoding doesn't match anything in our communication libraries." "Can you decode it?" "I already started. The outer layer of the signal is relatively simple, almost like they designed it to be a key to understand the rest. It's mathematical. Prime number sequences, then geometric ratios, then something that looks like a periodic table but with elements we haven't cataloged yet." She paused. "I think they've done this before. I think they've made first contact with other species before and they've developed a standard protocol for introducing themselves to a civilization at our level." "What's the inner layer?" Marcus asked. "Working on it," she said. "Give me a few hours." 4 hours later, Dr. Nair walked into General Reyes's office and set a single printed sheet of paper on the desk. It was the translation. General Reyes read it once. Then she read it again. Then she set it down on the desk, looked at Marcus and said, "Get the president on the line." Marcus looked at the paper. The translation was imperfect. Dr. Nair had noted that several concepts didn't have clean equivalents in any human language and that she had done her best to approximate them. But the core message was clear enough. Read. "We are the Keth. We have traveled from beyond the boundary of your star's influence to make contact with your species. We have observed your civilization for 112 of your years. You are at a critical stage of development. We have come to deliver an assessment and to extend an invitation. We come without hostility. We request communication. We will hold our approach at a distance of 100 million of your distance units from your sun until communication is established. We do not threaten. We observe. We wait." The distance of 100 million distance units, which Dr. Nair calculated corresponded roughly to the distance between Earth and the Sun, put the Keth ships somewhere around the orbit of Venus at current approach speed. They stopped exactly there. On day 7 at precisely 12 noon Greenwich Mean Time, the 3 Keth vessels decelerated from 30% of the speed of light to a complete stop in a span of approximately 45 seconds. The physics of it made every scientist on Earth go quiet for a long moment. "That kind of deceleration should have destroyed everything aboard those ships," said Dr. James Hartley, the head of UEDC's physics division, in a briefing that afternoon. He was a heavy-set man in his 60s with white hair and the permanently slightly baffled expression of someone who had spent his life trying to understand the universe and had finally been confronted with the fact that he understood a great deal less of it than he thought. "The inertial forces alone should have turned any biological crew into paste," Marcus finished. "Well, yes. Either they have inertial dampening technology that is beyond our ability to even conceive of right now, or the crew of those ships isn't biological in the way we understand biology." He pushed his glasses up his nose. "Or possibly both. What are the ships doing now that they've stopped?" General Reyes asked. "Nothing," Marcus said. "They're just sitting there, waiting exactly like they said." The decision to respond took 36 hours of continuous global diplomacy, a marathon of emergency UN sessions, presidential briefings, military conferences, and ethical debates that nearly broke down on 3 separate occasions. Every nation on Earth had a stake. Every nation had an opinion. The arguments ranged from respond with everything we have before they get any closer, to send a delegation immediately and accept their invitation. In the end, the decision was made to respond. President Voss composed the response herself with input from a team of diplomats, scientists, philosophers, and one poet named Samuel Kim who had been quietly included in the process by Dr. Nair on the grounds that, whoever we are when we say hello to the universe for the first time should include someone who knows how to say things beautifully. The response was brief. It acknowledged the Keth's message. It stated that Earth welcomed communication. It asked what the assessment and the invitation referred to. It was transmitted on the same frequency and in the same mathematical encoding that the Keth had used. They waited. The response came back in 6 hours. Dr. Nair translated it overnight, working with a team of 15 linguists and a battery of AI analysis systems. By morning she had a full translation, and she brought it to General Reyes and Marcus in a conference room on level 8 just as the first light of dawn was starting to creep through the ventilation ducts and remind everyone that the outside world still existed. The message was long this time. Much longer. The Keth explained in careful and patient detail what they were. They were an ancient civilization. How ancient was difficult to pin down precisely from the language, but Dr. Nair's best estimate was somewhere between 50,000 and 500,000 years older than humanity. They had long since moved beyond biological existence. The ships were crewed not by physical beings in the conventional sense but by patterns of consciousness that existed within complex energy fields, which the Keth called resonance forms. They were, effectively, beings of organized energy who lived within machines. They were, as Dr. Hartley had quietly predicted, not biological in any way that humanity understood. The Keth were also, they explained, part of something larger. There was a community of advanced civilizations in the galaxy, dozens of them spread across thousands of light years, who had been in communication and cooperation for a very long time. They called this community the Accord. The Accord was not a government. It was not an empire. It was more like a covenant, a set of shared agreements about how advanced civilizations should behave toward each other and toward younger species that were still developing. Earth was a younger species that was still developing. The Keth had been watching humanity for 112 years, specifically since the first nuclear weapons test in 1945, because that event had crossed a threshold that the Accord monitored. Any species that achieved the ability to destroy itself was considered to have entered a critical developmental window, and the Accord paid close attention to what species did with that ability. What Earth had done with that ability, the Keth said, was the subject of their assessment. The assessment was detailed, careful, and in places deeply uncomfortable to read. The Keth had watched humanity fight wars, commit atrocities, destroy ecosystems, push dozens of species to extinction, and treat the weakest members of its own civilization with shocking cruelty. They had also watched humanity create art of extraordinary beauty, show compassion and sacrifice on a massive scale when it was needed, develop technologies that healed the sick and fed the hungry, and, crucially from the Accord's perspective, reach out into space and begin the long process of becoming a multi-world species. The assessment concluded that humanity was, in the Keth's considered opinion, a species with enormous potential and a deeply troubled history, a combination that the Accord had seen many times before. Some of those species had grown into great and contributing members of the galactic community. Some of them had destroyed themselves before they got there. The Keth did not know which path humanity would take. But they were here, they said, to offer humanity a chance to take the better one. The invitation was for a representative of Earth, one representative, alone and unarmed, to come aboard the lead Keth vessel for a direct meeting. They specified one more thing at the end of the message, something that made the room go very quiet when Dr. Nair read it aloud. They said that the invitation was genuine. They said they meant no harm. But they also said that the Accord had, in its long history, encountered species that had made choices that were incompatible with the continuation of the wider galactic community. Species that had weaponized technology in ways that threatened others. Species that had attempted to dominate or destroy rather than cooperate. When those situations arose, the Accord acted. The Keth were not threatening Earth. They were describing a historical reality. But the description was clear enough that nobody in the room had any trouble understanding what it meant. The Accord would not allow a dangerous species to grow unchecked. The galaxy had rules. Earth was being given the opportunity to learn them, accept them, and join the community that lived by them. Or face the consequences of choosing otherwise. The debate that followed the translation of that message was the most intense political and ethical argument in the history of human civilization. Every government on Earth had an opinion. Every military had a position. Every religion had a response. Marcus Webb sat through 40 hours of it and said very little. He watched the arguments go back and forth. He watched people's fear and pride and hope and stubbornness collide in conference rooms and on global broadcast feeds and in the streets of every city on Earth. He watched and listened and thought. On the second night after the message, he called Lily. They want a representative to go to them, he said. One person. Alone. I heard, she said. Who do they think it's going to be? Nobody's decided yet. There's a list of candidates. Diplomats. Scientists. Heads of state. Dad, Lily said quietly. Yeah. I think it should be you. Marcus was quiet. Why me? Because you understand both sides, she said. You're a soldier, so they know you understand the threat. But you're also someone who actually listens. I've watched you my whole life. You're one of the only people I've ever met who can be in a room with someone completely opposite to you and actually hear what they're saying instead of just waiting for your turn to talk. She paused. The universe is talking to us for the first time, Dad. We need someone who knows how to actually listen. Marcus Webb sat in his office on level 6 of Cheyenne Mountain and stared at the wall for a very long time. Then he made a phone call. General Reyes, he said. I want to put my name forward for the delegation. The selection process took 5 days. During those 5 days, the world watched the Keth ships sitting silent and still near the orbit of Venus, and the world held its breath. Markets were closed. Schools were closed in most countries. People gathered in homes and community centers and public squares, watching the news feeds, watching the empty space where those 3 vast shapes hung in the darkness, and they waited. Marcus's name was not the only one considered. There were 47 candidates on the initial list. Diplomats, scientists, philosophers, military officers from a dozen nations. Each was evaluated on a set of criteria that had been hastily assembled by a joint UN-UEDC committee. Strategic understanding, emotional stability, scientific literacy, diplomatic experience, communication skills, and what one committee member described as the ability to represent the best of humanity without misrepresenting what humanity actually is. That last criterion was the hardest one to evaluate. On day 3 of the selection process, Marcus was summoned to a private meeting with President Voss in a secure conference room inside the facility. She was smaller in person than she appeared on screen, compact, precise, with eyes that analyzed everything they looked at. She sat across from him at a small table and looked at him for a moment before speaking. Tell me why you, she said. Because I know exactly how badly this could go, Marcus said. And I'm willing to go anyway. That sounds more like courage than qualification. The two aren't mutually exclusive, he said. I've spent 18 years working at the intersection of defense and diplomacy. I know what the Keth's message means in military terms. I understand the implicit threat behind the invitation. But I also know that responding to that threat with aggression would be the single biggest mistake in human history. He paused. They've been watching us for over a century. They know everything about us. They know every war we've fought, every atrocity we've committed, every beautiful thing we've made. They came here anyway. They're offering us a door. Somebody has to walk through it. President Voss studied him for a long moment. You understand that if this goes wrong, if something happens to you out there, it could mean war? Not a war we could win. I understand, he said. I also understand that if we don't send someone, it definitely means war. She was quiet for another moment. Then she said, You have a daughter. Yes. She knows you're putting yourself forward for this? It was her idea, Marcus said. Something shifted in President Voss's expression. Just slightly, just for a moment. Get out of here, she said. I'll let you know the decision by morning. The decision came at 4 a.m. Marcus Webb was selected as Earth's representative to the Keth. He had 2 days to prepare. He spent them in briefings, in physical examinations, in hours of consultation with Dr. Nair about the Keth's language and culture and everything she had been able to piece together from the messages. He learned everything there was to learn about the Accord, which was frustratingly little, since almost everything they knew came from those 2 messages. He worked with a team of linguists to prepare opening statements in the Keth's mathematical linguistic format. He reviewed every piece of sensor data on the Keth ships a dozen times. He also spent 3 hours with Lily. They didn't talk about strategy or politics or the fate of the world. They sat on the same rooftop where Lily had been sitting with Rosa on the first day watching the sky, and they talked about ordinary things. About the molecular biology test that she had finally taken, a week late, and gotten a 92 on. About the documentary about deep-sea fish they had watched together last month. About the hiking trip they had been planning to take in the summer, up into the Rocky Mountains north of the city, to a lake they had been to once when Lily was 8 years old and had never gone back to since. We'll go this summer, Marcus said. When this is over. Lily looked at him. Promise? Yes, he said. I promise. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and they both looked up at the sky. Somewhere out there, invisible to the naked eye, the 3 Keth vessels waited. Don't be afraid of them, Lily said quietly. I think they came a very long way to meet us. The vehicle that would carry Marcus to the Keth ship was humanity's fastest and most advanced deep space craft, the UEDC vessel Resolute, a sleek, heavily shielded ship with a crew of 12 and enough fuel to reach the rendezvous point in approximately 4 days at full burn. It had been retrofitted in the 2 days available with every kind of communication system Dr. Nair could install, every type of sensor array that Dr. Hartley could think of, and, because nobody could entirely help themselves, a full complement of defensive systems that everyone agreed would be absolutely useless if the Keth decided to act aggressively, but that made people feel somewhat better to have there anyway. The Resolute launched from the UEDC's orbital platform at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. Half the world watched the launch on their screens. Marcus sat in the command chair and looked out through the forward viewport as the blue arc of Earth slowly fell away behind them, and he felt the particular combination of sensations. Not quite calm, not quite fear, something in between that he had no precise word for, that he associated with moments when history was being made. The pilot, a young woman named Captain Sophia Chin, turned from her console and looked at him. Course locked in, Director Webb, she said. 4 days to rendezvous. You might want to sleep. I might, Marcus agreed. He did not sleep. He spent the 4 days studying, preparing, thinking, and, in the quiet hours of the ship's night cycle, lying in his bunk and staring at the ceiling and thinking about the lake in the Rocky Mountains and the way Lily had looked at him on the rooftop and said, "Don't be afraid of them." He thought about what the Keth had said. He thought about the word consequences. He thought about what consequences might look like when delivered by a civilization that was between 50,000 and 500,000 years older than humanity. He thought about the Accord's history, the species that had made bad choices, the ones that hadn't grown into good members of the galactic community, the ones the Accord had acted on. He thought about his daughter. He thought about the lake. On day 3 of the journey, something unexpected happened. Dr. Nair, who had stayed at the UEDC facility and was relaying communications to and from the Resolute, sent an urgent message. A 4th Keth ship had appeared. Not from the direction of outer space. Not arriving from somewhere distant. Appearing, simply materializing out of empty space, in high Earth orbit 50 kilometers above the atmosphere. It was different from the other three. Much smaller, only about 200 meters long, and different in shape, more curved, more organic in form. It had appeared without any warning from any sensor system on Earth. One moment the orbital space around Earth had been empty. The next moment the ship was there. Marcus read the message 3 times. "Are they threatening?" he asked on the comm. "No," Dr. Nair said, her voice tight but controlled. "No weapon signatures. No aggressive maneuvers. Just park. Sitting there in orbit. We've been broadcasting to it on the Keth frequency but we haven't gotten a response. What are the orbital defense platforms doing?" "That's the problem," she said. 3 of the 6 platforms have powered their weapon systems. The commanders are requesting authorization to fire. Marcus's stomach clenched. "Do not authorize that," he said. "Do you hear me? Do not fire on that ship. Tell General Reyes that is my direct recommendation." "Marcus," Dr. Nair said quietly, "there's something else. The ship appeared about 8 hours ago. In that time we've been running sensor analysis on it, and we found something." "What?" "It's broadcasting a signal. A very simple signal, different from the other Keth transmissions. We decoded it quickly." She paused. "Marcus, it's broadcasting what appears to be a single coordinate. A location on Earth's surface." "Where?" She was quiet for a moment. "Denver, Colorado," she said. "Roughly the location of your apartment building." The comm was silent for a long moment. "Lily," Marcus said. "She's safe," Dr. Nair said quickly. "We have people with her. She's safe." "But Marcus." "They're not threatening her," Marcus said, more to himself than to Dr. Nair. He was thinking fast, fitting pieces together. "They know everything about me. They selected me, or at least they knew I would be the one coming. And now they've sent a second contact point. To my home." He paused. "They're trying to establish a second line of communication. A parallel channel. While I'm coming to them, they're reaching out on the other end." "To your 16-year-old daughter?" Dr. Nair said. "She's not just my daughter," Marcus said quietly. "She's the one who told me to come out here. Maybe they know that too." He paused. "Don't fire on that ship. Tell Lily I said to listen." Back in Denver, Lily Webb stood on the rooftop of her apartment building and looked up at the small, curved shape of the Keth vessel hanging in the sky above the city. She could actually see it. Barely, it was a point of light, slightly different from the stars around it, too steady and too bright to be anything natural. But it was there, and she knew what it was, and she looked at it without flinching. Around her, the building had been quietly secured by UEDC personnel in plain clothes who had arrived a few hours after the ship appeared. They were respectful and non-intrusive. They didn't crowd her, didn't restrict her movements within the building, just maintained a perimeter and watched. The agent in charge, a tall woman named Agent Torres, had told Lily what Dr. Nair had said, that the ship was broadcasting a signal that appeared to reference her building. Lily had nodded calmly and said, "I know." Agent Torres had looked at her for a moment. "You know? It's not threatening me," Lily said. "If they wanted to hurt me, they would have. The signal isn't an attack, it's an address. They're letting us know they know where we are. That's a communication." She paused. "My dad is going to them. They're coming to me. It's a conversation." Agent Torres had no immediate response to this. Lily went to the rooftop. She was up there for about an hour watching the ship before something happened. Her phone, which she was holding in her hand because she didn't want to miss a call from her father, began to vibrate with a notification. Not a call, not a message. A new sound she had never heard before, and a new kind of display on her screen. Something that appeared over her regular interface like a layer of light, geometric patterns cycling through configurations she didn't recognize. She stared at it. Then, carefully, she tapped the geometric patterns. The display changed. The cycling patterns stilled. A new configuration appeared, something that Lily recognized to her astonishment, as similar to the mathematical encoding that Dr. Nair had described from the Keth's initial transmissions. Prime sequences, geometric ratios, the building blocks of a universal language. Her phone was receiving a direct transmission from the ship above. Lily Webb, 16 years old, scored a 92 on her molecular biology test, sat down cross-legged on the rooftop of her apartment building in Denver, Colorado, and began to work on decoding the most important message in human history. She worked for 3 hours before going inside to get help. When she went back downstairs and knocked on Agent Torres's door with a notebook full of handwritten mathematical analysis and a look on her face that made the experienced UDC agent take an involuntary step backward, Torres immediately called Dr. Nair. Dr. Nair listened to Lily's description of what she had received and decoded, asked 3 rapid questions and then said, "Put me on a 3-way channel with Director Webb. Right now." The call connected 20 minutes later. Marcus's voice came through with a slight delay due to the distance. He was now more than halfway to the Keth rendezvous point. "Lily," he said. "Talk to me." "Dad," she said, her voice steady. "They sent me a message. It's not the same kind as the ones they sent to the facility. It's simpler. Much simpler, like they adjusted the encoding for a younger decoder. But I worked through most of it and I think—" She paused. "Dad, I think they're apologizing." "Apologizing for what?" "For scaring us," she said. "The ship above the city, they know it was frightening. They say it was necessary because they needed to establish a direct connection to a—" She consulted her notebook. "They use a word that I'm translating as untrained mind. Someone who hasn't been briefed or prepared. A raw perspective." She paused again. "Dad, they specifically chose me because I'm not part of the military or the government. They wanted to talk to someone who was just a person." There was a long silence on the comm. Then Marcus said quietly, "What else did they say?" "They said," Lily read from her notebook, "that the assessment they're giving to you, the one about whether humanity qualifies to join the Accord, isn't going to be determined by the government or the military or the official representative. They said those things matter, but what actually matters is—" She hesitated. "I'm not sure I'm translating this right, but it seems like they're saying what matters is whether ordinary people, people who aren't in charge of anything, whether they can face something completely unknown and respond with understanding instead of fear." The comm was very quiet. "They're testing all of us," Marcus said slowly. "Not just me." "Yes," Lily said. "I think so." She looked at her notebook. "And Dad, there's one more thing they said. At the end of the message." She took a breath. "They said, 'We have given one warning. The warning was the arrival. If your world cannot hear the warning as kindness, it will hear the consequence as truth.'" That message was relayed to General Reyes and President Voss within the hour. The reaction from the world's military establishments was immediate and intense. 3 nations, whose names were diplomatically withheld from the public announcement that followed, formally requested authorization to launch a strike against the small Keth vessel in Earth orbit. 2 others activated additional defense batteries. 1 nation scrambled fighter craft into the upper atmosphere, which accomplished nothing except creating an expensive and embarrassing spectacle. General Reyes denied all requests for offensive action. She issued a terse, clear statement to the assembled military commanders: "We will not fire first. If they fire first, we will respond with everything we have. Until that moment, every trigger finger stays still. That is a direct order." She also called a private meeting with Marcus, via the comm system. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I'm fine," he said. "How are the platform commanders?" "Managed," she said, which was her way of saying barely. "Marcus, the warning. Do you think they mean it?" "Yes," he said without hesitation. "They've had 112 years to decide whether we're worth the trouble. They haven't destroyed us yet. But they're old enough and powerful enough to mean exactly what they say." He paused. "Diana, keep the platforms down. I know it goes against every instinct in the building. But keep them down." "I know," she said. "I know. Just get there and do your job." "I will," he said. The Resolute reached the rendezvous point on the morning of day 4, just as the ship's clock ticked past 6. Marcus stood in the forward observation bay and looked at the Keth vessel for the first time with his own eyes rather than a sensor feed. Even at this distance, several thousand kilometers, it was enormous. 6 kilometers long, roughly triangular but with edges that curved in organic ways, surfaces that seemed to shift and change color as he looked at them, cycling through shades of deep blue and silver and gold in slow, hypnotic patterns. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Captain Chen's voice came over the ship's comm: "We're receiving a docking guidance signal from the lead vessel. It looks like they're directing us to a specific approach vector." "Follow it," Marcus said. The Resolute moved slowly toward the Keth ship, following the guidance signal to a section of the vessel's hull that seemed to open as they approached. A smooth, seamless aperture that widened to admit them and then closed behind them with a softness that felt more like a breath than a mechanical action. They were inside. The dock, if it could be called that, was a vast, curving space filled with a light that had no visible source, a warm amber gold that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. There was no obvious sign of machinery. The walls, the floor, the ceiling all curved into each other without visible joins, like the interior of a vast seashell. Marcus suited up. He had been told, based on analysis of the Keth's energy signatures, that the environment inside the ship was likely to be breathable. The Keth, despite not being biological in the traditional sense, appeared to maintain conditions that were compatible with biological life, possibly as a courtesy to exactly this kind of meeting. He checked his suit anyway. Then he thought of Lily telling him don't be afraid of them, and he took the suit off again. He walked to the airlock in his regular clothes, dark gray UEDC uniform, no insignia beyond his name and title, no weapons, and cycled through. The air on the other side was breathable. Slightly different from Earth's, a bit richer in oxygen, a slight sweet undertone that he couldn't identify, but breathable. He took a breath. Then another. Then he walked forward into the light. They came to meet him. Or at least, something came to meet him. What it was, exactly, was difficult for Marcus to describe later in any language that felt adequate. It was not a physical body in the way he understood the term. It was a presence, a concentrated area of shifting light and energy, roughly humanoid in proportion if he had to assign it a shape, though it had no fixed edges. Colors moved through it like weather, and when it spoke he heard the sound not in his ears but in some deeper place that he couldn't locate precisely. He understood it though. Somehow, whether because of the translation systems Dr. Nair had embedded in the small device in his ear or because of something more fundamental that he couldn't explain, he understood. Marcus Webb, the voice said. Not a question. A recognition. Yes, he said. You came alone. As requested. Pause. The colors in the presence shifted, a deep, slow pulse of gold. You were afraid, it said. During the journey. At night. Yes, he said. But you came anyway. Yes. Another pause. This matters, the presence said. Fear without paralysis is a quality of note. Marcus looked at the presence directly, meeting it without looking away. What do I call you? He asked. In your language there is no precise equivalent for what I am, it said. But there is a word you use for the oldest member of a family, the one who remembers what the others have forgotten. The one who carries the history. Elder, Marcus said. That will do, it said. Elder. The meeting lasted 11 hours by the Resolute's ship clock. In those 11 hours, Marcus Webb had a conversation with a being that was, by best estimate, older than the entirety of recorded human civilization. Not old in the sense of merely having lived a long time, but old in the sense of having experienced and processed and understood things that were simply outside the frame of human experience. Elder spoke carefully, as if aware that every word needed to be calibrated to what Marcus was capable of understanding. Marcus listened with the full, total attention that his daughter had always told him was his best quality. He asked questions when he didn't understand. He didn't pretend to understand when he didn't. He sat with the weight of things he couldn't fully process and told Elder, honestly, when something was too large for him to take in all at once. Elder seemed to appreciate this. The first thing Elder explained was the nature of the Accord. It was not, as Marcus had imagined, a parliament or a governing body. It was closer to a set of principles, agreed upon over millennia by dozens of civilizations, refined by experience and occasionally by tragedy. The core of the Accord was simple. Advanced civilizations had a responsibility to manage their power in ways that did not threaten the development of younger species, and younger species seeking to join the community of advanced civilizations had to demonstrate the ability to manage their own destructive impulses. What does that demonstration look like? Marcus asked. Historically, Elder said, it has taken many forms. Some species have demonstrated it through generations of peaceful development. Some have demonstrated it by choosing diplomacy over war at a critical moment. Some have demonstrated it by how they treat the weakest members of their own civilization, whether they choose compassion or exploitation. Pause. Some have failed the demonstration. What happens then? If a species reaches the stage of development where it can threaten other worlds, and then demonstrates that it will not restrain that capability, the Accord acts to limit the threat. How? Another pause. A longer one this time. The colors in Elder's presence cycled through something darker, something heavier. The methods vary, Elder said. We do not prefer it. It is not done without great consideration and grief. Pause. But it is done. Marcus felt the weight of that settle in his chest. And Earth, he said. Are we at that stage? You have been at that stage for some time, Elder said. You have weapons capable of ending your own civilization. You have sent machines beyond your solar system. You have established permanent presence on other worlds. You are at the precise stage where the question of what you will become cannot be deferred any longer. Pause. This is why we came. To assess us. To assess, Elder confirmed. But also, and I want to be very precise about this, Marcus Webb, to give you every opportunity to demonstrate the best of what you are. Pause. We did not come to catch you in your worst moment. We came because we believe you have a best moment in you. Marcus was quiet for a long time. What do we need to do, he finally said. That, Elder said, is the question we have been waiting for you to ask. Not, what do you want from us? Not, what are you going to do to us? But what do we need to do? What's the difference? The first two questions assume that we are the ones with the power in this situation, Elder said. The last question assumes that you have the power to determine your own future. That assumption is correct. Pause. The others, the species that failed, they never asked that question. They asked what we wanted and then tried to figure out how to resist or deceive or circumvent. They never understood that the answer was entirely in their own hands. By hour 6, Marcus had a clear picture of what the Accord was asking. It was not asking Earth to disarm. It was not asking Earth to surrender its sovereignty. It was not asking for any particular political structure or form of government. It was asking for a line. One line, clearly drawn, publicly committed to, and enforced. The line was this: humanity could not use weapons of mass destruction against inhabited worlds. Any world, whether it belonged to another species, to a colony of humans, or to a developing civilization that had not yet made contact. Any inhabited world was off-limits for the kind of total annihilation warfare that humanity had been developing the capability for since 1945. That was all. One line. That seems manageable, Marcus said, and then immediately felt that the word manageable was perhaps the most inadequate word he had ever used. It is not small, Elder said, as if reading his thought. Many of your world's military establishments will resist it. There will be those who argue that such a commitment reduces your defensive options. There will be those who argue that you cannot trust the Accord to protect you if you make such a commitment. There will be those who simply resist any constraint on their power because constraint itself feels like weakness. Pause. All of these arguments are familiar. We have heard them from every species that has faced this moment. What do you say to them? We say, Elder said, that a species that cannot make a promise, and keep it, is a species that is not ready to be trusted with the stars. Pause. And we say something else. We say that you are not alone. The Accord is a community. It offers protection as well as requiring responsibility. If Earth commits to the line, if you make the promise and keep it, then Earth is no longer standing alone in an empty universe. You'd protect us, Marcus said. From external threats? Yes. The Accord has resources and capabilities that make your defense forces look like candles in a hurricane, Marcus Webb. Any species that attempted to threaten Earth while Earth was an Accord member would find itself facing something it could not imagine. Pause. But we cannot protect you from yourselves. That part you must do on your own. In the final hour of the meeting, Elder said something that Marcus had not expected. There is something you should know about why we came now, Elder said. Not why the Accord sent us, you understand that? But why now, this year, this moment? Tell me, Marcus said. 50 years ago, Elder said, a signal was sent from your world that we intercepted. Not a deliberate communication, an accidental transmission, a burst of data from one of your early deep space probes. Inside that data was something that one of our analysts noticed. Pause. Poetry. Marcus blinked. Poetry. One of your earliest humans to travel beyond your world's atmosphere, a member of an expedition to your moon, we believe, had privately recorded a reading of something he found beautiful. It was small. It was personal. It was not intended for anyone beyond himself. Pause. But it traveled, and we found it, and the analyst who found it spent a great deal of time thinking about what it meant that a species which was simultaneously building weapons capable of destroying cities could also send one of its members into the blackness of space with a poem in his heart. Marcus was very still. What poem was it? We do not have a perfect translation, Elder said. But the core of it was something about how, when you look at the stars, you are not looking at light. You are looking at distance. And every star is someone else's sun. And every someone else's sun might warm someone else's world. Pause. That idea, that the stars are not empty, that they are inhabited, and that the response to that idea should be wonder and connection rather than fear and competition, that idea is precisely what the Accord was built upon. Marcus said nothing. His throat was tight. You are a species of contradictions, Elder said. You are capable of terrible things and extraordinary things in equal measure. The Accord has debated for 50 years which side of your nature would win. We are here because we believe the side that sent a man into space with a poem in his heart can win. Pause. But we need you to believe it too. Marcus returned to the Resolute 11 hours after he had left it. Captain Chin and the crew watched him walk back through the airlock with expressions that he couldn't quite read, a mixture of relief, awe, and the particular kind of tension that comes from 11 hours of not knowing what is happening 1,000 meters away. Director Webb, Chin said. Are you? I'm fine, he said. Get me a secure channel to General Reyes and President Voss. I need to brief them immediately. He spent the next 3 hours on the comm, relaying everything Elder had told him. He was precise and thorough and complete. He described the accord, the line, the promise that was being asked for. He described the consequences of refusing. He described what Elder had said about the species that had failed and what had happened to them. When he finished, there was a long silence on the comm. Then President Voss said, "The line is a weapons ban." Effectively. On weapons used against inhabited worlds, Marcus said. Yes. There will be people who say that's unverifiable. That we can't confirm they'll honor their side. That it's a trap. There will be, Marcus said. But consider this, they've been watching us for 112 years. They already know everything we're capable of and everything we're not. They don't need a trap. They could have wiped us out before we knew they were coming if that was the goal. He paused. The trap argument only makes sense if you assume they're more like us than they actually are. They're not. They're 50,000 years past the point where they need to trick anyone. Another silence. Then General Reyes, what's the timeline? They want an answer in 30 days, Marcus said. A formal, public commitment from Earth's governments, not just a private diplomatic agreement. Public because it has to be a promise made to the world, not just to them. 30 days, Voss said. Yes. And if we say no? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then we find out what consequence means when it's delivered by something that can decelerate from 30% of the speed of light in 45 seconds. He paused. I don't recommend that option. The Resolute began the journey home. On the second day of the return trip, Marcus received a message from Lily. She had been in contact with the small Keth ship that was still in orbit above Denver. The ship had sent her a second message, this one much simpler than the first. A single image, rendered in the mathematical encoding she had learned to read. It was a picture of a door. Open. The 30 days that followed were the most intense period of human politics in recorded history. The debate happened everywhere at once. In the United Nations, in national legislatures, in city councils, in universities and churches and living rooms and social media threads that stretched across every culture and language on Earth. The question of the Accord's offer was dissected from every possible angle. Philosophers argued about sovereignty. Scientists argued about verification. Military strategists argued about vulnerability. Economists argued about the implications for trade and development. Religious leaders argued about the spiritual significance of contact. Historians pointed out parallels with every treaty, every alliance, every covenant in human history. Marcus was in the middle of all of it. He testified before the UN Security Council. He testified before the US Congress. He did 300 interviews, spoke at 12 major international conferences, and had conversations that ranged from private meetings with heads of state to unexpected discussions with strangers he met in airports and grocery stores who had recognized him from the news. He said the same thing to all of them. He said, the question isn't whether we can trust them. It's whether we can trust ourselves. The opposition was fierce and, in many cases, sincere. The loudest voice against the commitment came from General Karl Novak, the head of Russia's Strategic Defense Command. A barrel-chested man with a booming voice and the kind of absolute certainty that made him very convincing on television even when he was wrong. He appeared on every major broadcast and argued, with considerable passion, that the Keth's offer was a trap, that the Accord was an empire in disguise, and that humanity had spent thousands of years fighting for its freedom and was not going to surrender it to beings who showed up in their solar system uninvited and started issuing ultimatums. He was not entirely wrong about the emotional reality of what the situation felt like. He was, Marcus believed, almost entirely wrong about what it meant and what the right response was. The two of them had a famous argument. Famous because it was broadcast live to an audience of approximately 4 billion people during a UN emergency session. Novak argued that sovereignty and defensive capability were non-negotiable. Marcus argued that no sovereign nation and no defensive capability on Earth could survive what the Accord could bring to bear if Earth refused, and that the question of sovereignty was irrelevant if the species making that argument no longer existed. So we simply bow to them, Novak said. Like subjects. We make a promise, Marcus said. Like adults. The clip of that exchange was shared more than any piece of media in human history. Lily, meanwhile, continued her correspondence with the Keth ship in orbit. She was not official. She had no authority. She was a 16-year-old girl with a notebook full of mathematical translations and a phone that had become the most unusual communication device in history. UDC let her continue the contact because they had quietly concluded that she was getting information that their official channels weren't, not because the Keth were more forthcoming with her, but because she was asking better questions. She asked them what they loved. The response took 2 days and came back as a cascade of images in the mathematical encoding. Images that Lily translated with Dr. Nair's help and that, when they were finally understood, made several senior scientists sit down very abruptly. The Keth loved mathematics. They loved the patterns that existed in nature, the spiral of galaxies and the spiral of shells, the same equations governing both. They loved music, though they experienced it differently from humans, as a phenomenon of organized vibration that they could interact with directly through their energy form existence. They loved what they called the new, encounters with species and ideas and configurations of existence they had never encountered before, because in their vast age the new had become rare and precious. They loved, one message said, the specific kind of curiosity that characterized young species, the willingness to ask questions that older civilizations had long since answered and therefore stopped asking. The beginner's mind, one of Lily's teachers had once called it. They love us, Lily told Marcus on a call when he was 2 days from Earth. Not despite the fact that we're young and scared and confused. Because of it. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, write that down. Send it to Dr. Nair. That's something the world needs to hear right now. Day 28 of the 30-day window. The United Nations General Assembly voted. It was the most consequential vote in the history of the organization. Possibly the most consequential vote in the history of human governance. Every member nation was present. The chamber was packed beyond its design capacity, people standing in the aisles, every seat filled. The broadcast went to every screen on Earth. Every feed, every channel, every display. People watched from offices and living rooms and the sides of buildings and the packed public squares of 100 cities. The resolution was carefully worded. It had been drafted over 26 days by a committee of 147 diplomats, legal scholars, philosophers, and scientists. It went through 43 drafts. It was translated into every official UN language and reviewed for nuance and implication in each one. Its core commitment was clear. Earth, as a unified planet, commits to the principle that weapons of mass destruction, defined as any weapon capable of rendering an inhabited world uninhabitable, shall not be used against any inhabited world, regardless of species, political status, or military context. This commitment is made freely, publicly, and permanently, as a condition of Earth's engagement with the wider community of galactic civilizations. The secondary clauses dealt with verification, enforcement mechanisms, the role of the UEDC in monitoring compliance, and a dozen other practical considerations. But the core was the line. The single line that the Accord had asked for. The vote was 173 in favor, 8 against, 12 abstentions. The 8 against included, predictably, General Novak's nation, along with a small cluster of governments that had spent the 30 days loudly insisting that the Accord was a threat and privately, Marcus suspected, being terrified of exactly what it represented. A universe that was larger and older and less controllable than they had been comfortable believing. But 173 in favor. The chamber erupted. Not in the controlled, dignified way that UN votes usually concluded. In the raw, loud, full-throated way that 8 billion people having the same feeling at the same time sounds when it spills out of one room. People cried. People embraced strangers. People looked up at the sky through windows and felt something they hadn't felt since the arrivals first appeared. Not fear, not dread, but something that felt more like possibility. Marcus Webb sat in the gallery above the chamber floor and watched it happen. He didn't cry, he wasn't a man who cried easily, but he felt something unlock in his chest, some knot of tension that had been there for 30 days, and he let himself breathe. General Reyes, sitting beside him, said nothing. But she put her hand briefly over his and squeezed once and then let go. The response from the Keth came within hours of the vote. Dr. Nair was at the UEDC facility when the transmission arrived. A long, complex signal on the main Keth frequency. She translated it through the night with her team, and the translation was ready by morning. She read it to Marcus and General Reyes over a comm link while he was still in New York. The Keth, the full Accord, not just the local delegation, acknowledged the vote. They recognized the commitment as genuine. They declared Earth formally eligible for contact under Accord protocols. They outlined the next steps. A phased process of deeper communication, technology exchange at a carefully managed pace, and formal introduction to the wider galactic community. They also, at the end of the message, said something that made Dr. Nair's voice catch very slightly when she read it. They said, "We have waited 112 of your years for this day. We did not know if it would come. We hoped. We are pleased to find that hope is not always foolish, even after the years we have lived." The small Keth vessel in orbit above Denver, the one that had appeared on that first frightening day and broadcast coordinates to Lily's building, departed Earth orbit the morning after the vote. It did not disappear or accelerate away. It simply moved slowly and gracefully out of the atmosphere's reach and then stopped. It stayed nearby, still visible from the surface on a clear night as a steady, warm point of light, but it pulled back from the direct proximity, as if acknowledging that its presence in orbit had been necessary and was now no longer needed. Lily watched it from the rooftop. Rosa was with her again, the same rooftop they had stood on the day the world changed. The night sky above Denver was very clear. The Keth vessel was visible, a steady amber light among the stars. "Do you think it's saying goodbye?" Rosa asked. "No," Lily said. "I think it's saying we'll be here. There's a difference." She looked at the light for a long moment. "It's not goodbye. It's the beginning." The world had voted yes. But the world was not a single thing, and the agreement of 173 nations in an international assembly did not mean the agreement of every human being who woke up every morning on the planet those nations represented. The 30-day countdown had ended. The accord was real. But reality, as Marcus knew better than most, had a way of being far more complicated in practice than it was on paper. The first crack appeared 12 days after the vote. It came from an unlikely place, not from one of the 8 dissenting nations as Marcus had expected, but from within a major participating nation's own military establishment. A leak. Classified documents made public through an anonymous source. Documents that outlined a contingency plan that had been quietly developed by a coalition of senior military officers from 5 nations, including 3 that had voted in favor of the resolution. The plan was called Operation Final Authority. Its premise was straightforward and terrifying. In the event that the accord proved to be a threat rather than an ally, in the event that the Keth's presence in the solar system was determined to be a precursor to invasion or colonization rather than genuine cooperation, humanity would preemptively strike the Keth vessels with the most powerful weapons available before the accord could prevent it. This was, in the clearest possible terms, the exact behavior that humanity had just publicly promised not to engage in. The leak detonated across the global news cycle like a bomb. The 8 dissenting nations immediately pointed to it as evidence that the resolution was meaningless, that Earth's governments had made a public commitment they had no intention of keeping. The Accord's supporters scrambled to distance themselves from the plan. 3 of the officers named in the documents resigned. 2 more refused to resign, publicly defending the plan as prudent contingency planning that any responsible government would have in place. And the Keth were watching. They always were. General Reyes called Marcus into her office the morning the story broke. "They know," she said. It was not a question. "They've been monitoring our communications for over a century," Marcus said. "They know. The question is what they'll do about it." "Has there been any transmission from the Keth since the leak?" "Not yet," Marcus said. "But it's been 6 hours." She looked at him. "What do you think they'll do?" "Nothing," he said. "I think they'll do nothing for now. Because the plan was never executed. Because it was a contingency plan, not a decision. And because," he paused, "because they understand us better than we understand ourselves. They know this is what happens when species make a big step. The fear doesn't disappear overnight. Some part of the population will always be planning for the worst. They know that. But there's a limit," Reyes said. "There's always a limit," he said. "That's what 'face the consequences' means." The transmission from the Keth came 18 hours after the leak. It came on the standard channel to the UEDC facility. Dr. Nair translated it in 4 hours and brought it to Marcus and Reyes without reading it to anyone else first. It said, "We are aware of the planning documents that have been made public. We anticipated that such plans existed. We do not hold the existence of contingency thinking against your species. It is a natural product of a military culture that has existed for thousands of years. A thought is not an action. A plan is not a choice. We do not judge Earth for the fact that some of its members fear us. But we say this clearly as we have said it before. The line between plan and action is the most important line that has ever existed on your world. It has existed before this moment. You have built weapons and chosen not to use them before. That choice, made repeatedly across generations, is part of why you are still here. We are watching. Not with hostility. With the same quality of attention that a parent gives to a child learning to walk, ready to catch a fall, but hoping above all that the child does not fall. We want you to succeed in this. We want Earth to become what it has the capacity to become. But we are also honest. The warning we gave when we arrived was real. The line is real. If it is crossed, not planned for, not debated but crossed, the consequence is real. Earth chose well in the vote. Earth must now choose well in the living. That is the harder task. Marcus read the translation 3 times. Then he went to a secure communication room and called Lily. The Keth sent a message, he said. About the Operation Final Authority leak. I heard about the leak, she said. What did they say? He read her the translation. She was quiet for a moment. The parent watching the child learn to walk, she said softly. They're really trying, aren't they? To be kind about this. They are, he said. Are the military guys going to understand that? Some of them, he said. Not all. What do we do about the ones who don't? Marcus thought about that. We keep doing the work, he said. The vote was the first step. The living is every step after that. It's going to take a long time, Lily. This isn't the kind of thing you fix in 30 days. I know, she said. But Dad, what they said at the end. That Earth must now choose well in the living, and that's the harder task. That's true for people too, isn't it? Not just countries. Yes, he said. It is. Then I think we can do it, she said. I've seen people do incredibly hard things when they understood why it mattered. Pause. We just have to keep understanding why it matters. The weeks after the leak were difficult. 3 nations attempted to formally withdraw from the resolution. Not all 3 succeeded, as their own legislative bodies blocked the attempts, but the efforts were loud and destabilizing. Several military commanders who had publicly signed off on the vote privately began the kind of quiet, slow-walking resistance that Marcus recognized from his years in defense politics. The kind where commitment was acknowledged officially and undermined gradually. Operation Final Authority turned out not to be the only such plan. Intelligence services across multiple nations began, under pressure from their governments, reviewing their classified archives, and what they found was a picture of exactly what the Keth would have predicted. A world full of good intentions and backup plans. Contingencies nested inside contingencies. The very architecture of modern military strategy was built on the assumption that every agreement might fail and every promise might be broken. Dismantling that architecture, or at least clearly separating the defensive from the genuinely threatening, was going to be a generational project. Marcus threw himself into it. He was named Earth's permanent liaison to the Accord, a title that had no precedent in any government on Earth and that required creating an entirely new institutional structure to support it. He assembled a team of 24 people. Diplomats, scientists, military experts, linguists, philosophers, a sociologist, 2 psychologists, and, at his personal insistence, 1 poet. Samuel Kim, the poet who had been quietly included in the first contact preparation team, joined the liaison office and almost immediately proved his worth by finding ways to explain the Accord's concepts to general audiences that no amount of technical briefing had managed. Dr. Nair became the chief scientific officer of the liaison office, managing all technical communication with the Keth. She worked 18-hour days and seemed genuinely happy for the first time in years. Lily started coming to the office on weekends. She wasn't there officially. She was too young and still in school. But she had established something with the Keth that nobody else had, a direct channel, a rapport, a kind of conversation that operated differently from the official diplomatic exchanges. The Keth, it turned out, genuinely valued her perspective in a way that was specific and not symbolic. They communicated with her differently, more openly, more personally, less formally, than with the official channels. Marcus noticed and quietly made sure she had access to whatever she needed. One evening, working late at the liaison office, Lily showed him a message she had received that day from the Keth ship still hovering at the edge of Earth's orbital neighborhood. It said, "The young one asks why we came in 3. The answer is simple. We did not know if 1 was enough. We have been wrong before, have arrived at a species believing in them and been wrong. We came in 3 because this felt important enough to arrive with our full attention." Lily had asked, "Were you scared?" The answer, "We do not experience fear in the way you do. But there is a quality we have. When something matters greatly and the outcome is uncertain, that might be close to what you mean by scared." Yes, we had that. Marcus read it twice. "They were scared," he said quietly. "Of course they were," Lily said. "They've been alive long enough to know how badly things can go. And they came anyway." She looked at her father. Like some people I know. 3 months after the vote, something happened that nobody had fully prepared for. Not because they hadn't thought about it. Not because the scenario wasn't in the risk assessments. But because knowing a thing intellectually and experiencing it in reality are two very different experiences, and nothing in human history had given humanity the real-world experience of what it felt like to have the wider galaxy watching you break a promise. The incident happened in the outer solar system. A UEDC patrol vessel, a fast, lightly armed ship called the Perseverance, encountered a previously unmapped object in the Kuiper Belt that turned out to be an Accord monitoring station. A small, automated structure, placed there by a species that had been a member of the Accord for 11,000 years, deployed to keep a passive eye on the solar system as part of the standard observation protocol for planets in the contact phase. The Perseverance's crew didn't know any of that. What they knew was that they had found an unidentified artificial structure in their solar system that hadn't been there last month, and their standing orders were to secure and investigate any such structure. The incident that followed was a chain of small compounding mistakes. The Perseverance attempted to scan the station with active sensor pulses, an action that, unknown to them, the monitoring station interpreted as a precursor to an attack. The station sent a defensive signal on a frequency the Perseverance wasn't monitoring. The crew, seeing no response and under pressure from a commanding officer who was new to the posting and anxious about the career implications of a non-decisive action, deployed a robotic arm to physically contact the station. The station, responding to what it read as an attack, activated a defensive pulse. The defensive pulse wasn't a weapon. It wasn't designed to destroy anything. It was designed to push back, to create enough electromagnetic interference to disable the immediate threat for a few minutes and send a distress signal to the nearest Accord vessel. The electromagnetic pulse disabled the Perseverance's systems for 6 minutes and 12 seconds. When the crew regained control of their ship, they sent an emergency message to UEDC headquarters. By the time Marcus received it, 12 other Accord vessels, from 6 different species, had received the monitoring station's distress signal and were already in transit toward the solar system. The Keth contacted Earth within the hour. The message was short. Shorter than any they had sent before. Dr. Nair read it to Marcus and General Reyes in a conference room that went very quiet when she finished. The monitoring station was not a threat. The crew of your patrol vessel acted without understanding and without intent to harm. We recognize this. But they acted. And 12 members of the Accord whose station was damaged are now moving toward your system. We have communicated with them and explained the context. Most of them understand. But understand this, Marcus Webb. This is the beginning of what consequence means. Not punishment. Consequence. The thing that follows from actions regardless of intent. Your people have been warned that the universe is no longer empty to them. They must now act as if they believe it. We have done what we can. The next hours are yours. Marcus called an emergency session. The 12 incoming Accord vessels were not aggressive. The Keth had explained the situation, and in the complex diplomatic framework of the Accord, 500 centuries of developed protocols for exactly this kind of misunderstanding, the precedents were clear. An action taken in ignorance by a crew that didn't know about the station's presence was categorized differently from a deliberate attack. But it still had to be addressed. What followed was the first genuine test of Earth's ability to operate in the wider galactic community. Not the vote, that had been a choice made in the controlled environment of a diplomatic process. This was the messiness of reality. The complicated, imperfect, fumbling first steps of a species that was trying to act according to a new framework in a universe that was suddenly, concretely, practically real. Marcus called the commanders of the 12 incoming vessels. He called them directly with Dr. Nair translating in real time, one by one, and he said the same thing to each of them. We made a mistake. Our crew did not know about the station because we did not know the station was there. We are not claiming that excuses the action. It doesn't. It explains it. The crew acted on standing orders designed for a world that didn't know it had neighbors. We are changing those orders now. We are requesting the opportunity to make this right, to repair the station, and to take the actions necessary to ensure it never happens again. He also said, we are new at this. We are going to make mistakes. We are asking for the same patience that any member of a community would extend to a new member who is genuinely trying. It was the right thing to say. Not because it fixed everything. It didn't, and 2 of the 12 incoming species were satisfied only after a formal diplomatic process that took 3 weeks and involved the Keth acting as mediators. But it was the right thing to say because it was honest, and because honesty was the one currency that the Accord seemed to value above all others. By the time the situation was fully resolved, 6 weeks after the initial incident, the Perseverance's captain had been reassigned, the robotic arm deployment protocols had been rewritten, and UEDC had issued updated standing orders for all patrol vessels operating beyond the asteroid belt that included detailed information about the presence and nature of Accord monitoring stations. It was, in the grand scheme of things, a small incident with a manageable resolution. But it had changed something. In the corridors of the UEDC facility, in the halls of the UN, in the liaison office where Marcus and his team worked, there was a new quality to the way people moved and spoke and thought. A new awareness. The universe was real. Their neighbors were real. The consequences of their actions were real. It wasn't fear anymore. It was something more grown-up than fear. It was responsibility. Marcus was sitting in his office late one evening, working through the post-incident report, when Lily called him. "I heard about the Perseverance," she said. "It's handled," he said. "I know. But I've been thinking about it." Pause. "Dad, the Keth said this is the beginning of what consequence means. They said consequence isn't punishment, it's the thing that follows from actions regardless of intent." Yes. That's the hardest lesson, isn't it? The one that's hardest to get people to really understand. That, "I didn't mean to," doesn't stop the consequence from being real. "Yes," he said. "It is." "I think that's what school is for," she said. "Like actually, all the stuff they teach you about history and science and all of it, I think the point of all of it is to make you understand that your actions have consequences whether you understand them or not. And the only way to have the right consequences is to actually understand the world you're acting in." Marcus smiled, tired, sitting in his office at midnight. "When did you get this smart?" "I've always been this smart," she said. "You've just been busy." "Fair point," he said. "Get some sleep." "You too," she said. "Dad, I'm proud of you." He was quiet for a moment. "Get some sleep, Lily?" But he was smiling when he said it. 6 months after the vote, Elder contacted Marcus directly. Not through the main UEDC channel. Not through the official liaison office communication system. Directly, through the same encrypted channel that had been established during the original meeting aboard the Keth ship, which Marcus kept active on a private terminal in his office. The message said, "We request a second meeting. We have something to show you." The second journey to the Keth ship was different from the first. The Resolute was not involved this time. Instead, a small shuttle, crewed only by Marcus, Captain Chin and 2 junior crew members, was used for the trip. And the trip itself was shorter because the lead Keth vessel had moved closer to the inner solar system since the formal contact had been established, taking up a position just beyond the orbit of Mars that had become, over the past 6 months, something very close to a permanent presence in humanity's extended neighborhood. Getting used to a 6-kilometer alien spacecraft as a permanent fixture in your solar system was, Marcus had come to understand, exactly the kind of thing that took a generation to become normal. He arrived at the Keth ship on the afternoon of the shuttle's second day. Elder was waiting. The greeting this time was warmer, or at least the quality of Elder's presence felt different. The colors were brighter, the energy steadier. 6 months of genuine, sustained cooperation had done something to the relationship that Marcus could feel even if he couldn't precisely name it. "You wanted to show me something," Marcus said. "Yes," Elder said. "But first, how are you?" Marcus blinked slightly. "I'm well," he said. "A little tired. It's been a busy 6 months." "Yes," Elder said. "We have watched. You have worked very hard." Pause. "You have also not taken a rest. This is a common quality in those who carry large responsibilities. It is not always healthy." "Are you concerned about my health?" "We are concerned about the health of the person who is Earth's connection to the Accord," Elder said. "These things are related." Pause. "Your daughter has mentioned it in her correspondence." Marcus laughed, a short and genuine sound that surprised him slightly. "Of course she has." "She is remarkable," Elder said. "I believe you know this." "I do," he said. "She asks questions that our analysts spend days discussing," Elder said. "Last week she asked us what we believe in. Not what we know, what we believe. We have not been asked that question in a very long time." Pause. "We believe that life, in all its forms, is the most improbable and precious thing in the universe. That the fact that it exists at all, here and there and 1,000 other places we have found it, is not something that can be taken for granted. That the preservation and growth of life is the closest thing to a sacred purpose that we have found in our long existence." The room, the space, the luminous, curving non-room of the Keth ship, was very quiet. "That's what Lily believes too," Marcus said softly. "She just doesn't have the words for it yet." "She will," Elder said. Now, come and see what we have brought you. What Elder showed Marcus was something that had no name in any human language. Not then, not in 2187. He would spend years afterward trying to describe it accurately and would ultimately write, in his memoir published a decade later, that it was like being shown a map of something you had always felt but never seen. The Keth had built, in the center of their vessel's largest interior space, what Elder called a relation model. It was a three-dimensional representation, enormously complex, built from light and mathematics and moving patterns, of the Accord's history. 200,000 years of civilizations rising, making contact, joining the community, developing, contributing, changing. Some of those civilizations were gone now, Elder explained. Not destroyed, simply transformed, evolved past the point of physical existence into something else, something the Keth didn't have words for in any language Marcus could understand. They had left marks on the model, resonances, patterns that persisted after they themselves had moved on. Some had been lost. Species that had made choices the Accord had been unable to prevent, that had triggered the worst of consequences. They appeared on the model as absences, spaces where the light simply stopped, holes in the pattern that made the surrounding connections look lonelier. There were not many of these absences, but there were some. Marcus looked at them for a long time. How many? He asked. 7, Elder said. In our recorded history. 7 species that could not find the way to coexist. 7 that crossed the lines that cannot be uncrossed. Pause. For each of them we grieve. Even now. Even after the centuries. The loss of a species, any species, is a permanent hole in what the universe could have been. What happened to them? We reduced their capacity for harm, Elder said, and the simplicity and weight of that sentence settled in the room like a stone dropped into water. We did not destroy them. We do not have the right to destroy a species. But we can limit what a species is able to do, and we did. They exist still, contained, limited, unable to expand or develop. They will remain so until, if, they demonstrate across generations that they have changed. Pause. It has not happened yet for any of the 7. That's like a cage, Marcus said. Yes, Elder said. We do not pretend otherwise. It is a cage. Made with sorrow and care and no other option remaining. Pause. We tell you this not to frighten you. You have already made your commitment. You have already shown us what you are choosing to be. We tell you this because we believe you deserve to know the full truth of what we are and what we have done. Pause. Honesty, in our experience, is the foundation of any lasting trust. Marcus stood in the middle of that vast, luminous map of 200,000 years of galactic history, surrounded by the light of hundreds of civilizations that had found the way to coexist, and he felt something he would later describe as the first moment he truly understood the size of what Earth had just stepped into. Not with fear. With something more like awe. We're very small, he said. Yes, Elder said. And very new. Yes. But you still came for us, he said. You still thought we were worth it. We have always thought the new ones were worth it, Elder said. Even when they frightened us. Even when we were not sure. Pause. Hope is not foolish, Marcus Webb. We said so in our first message and we say it again here looking at this map. Hope is not foolish. It is the only thing in the universe that cannot be defeated by time. Marcus returned to Earth 3 days later. He went straight to the liaison office. He called a meeting of his entire team. He told them about the second meeting, about the relation model, about the 7 absences in the light of 200,000 years. He also told them what Elder had said about hope. That night he went home to Denver for the first time in 3 weeks. He cooked dinner, badly, burning the rice and forgetting that the chicken needed to be seasoned, and he and Lily sat at the kitchen table in the apartment on the 14th floor and ate the slightly burned dinner and talked for 3 hours. He told her about the relation model. He told her about the 7 absences. He told her what Elder had said about hope. When he finished, Lily was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "We have to do better. Not for the Keth. Not for the Accord. For those 7 absences. For the ones who couldn't find the way." She looked at her father across the table. So that when they look at our part of the map in 1,000 years, we're light. Not an absence. Marcus Webb looked at his daughter and thought about the poem that had traveled from the moon to the stars and back again. Someone else's sun and someone else's world, and he thought about the lake in the Rocky Mountains that they still hadn't been to this summer. "We will be," he said. "I believe that." "Me too," she said. 8 months after the vote, the line was tested for real. Not by a mistake like the Perseverance incident. Not by a contingency plan leaking to the press. By a choice. A real, deliberate, fully considered choice, made by a human being in full knowledge of what it meant. The person who made it was Admiral Victor Crane of the United Earth Defense Command's Deep Space Operations Division. Victor Crane was 57 years old, decorated, highly respected, and absolutely convinced that the Keth were lying. He had been convinced of this since the beginning. He had not said so publicly, he was too professional for that, but his position on every internal debate had been consistent. The accord was a trap, the commitment was a mistake, and sooner or later the Keth would show their true intentions. He had spent 8 months watching for evidence that he was right, and in those 8 months the evidence had stubbornly refused to materialize. Until he believed now. In the 8th month of the accord contact period, Admiral Crane's Deep Space Intelligence Division produced a report. The report, compiled from sensor data, intercepted transmissions, and analysis of Accord vessel movements, claimed to show that 3 Accord member species had been quietly repositioning military assets in the region of space between Earth's solar system and the nearest star. The report argued that this repositioning was consistent with preparation for a coordinated assault on Earth. The report recommended a preemptive strike on the repositioned assets before they could be brought into range. The report was classified at the highest level. It went to General Reyes. It went to President Voss. It went to Marcus. Marcus read it in 2 hours and called a meeting. "This report is wrong," he said flatly, setting it on the conference table. Crane, who was present, did not flinch. "With respect, Director Webb, the data is being misinterpreted," Marcus said. "I've been in direct communication with Elder and with the liaison officers of all 3 species mentioned in this report for 8 months. I know their protocols. I know how their defense positioning works. What you're reading as offensive preparation is standard defensive rotation. It's the same pattern they use every 18 months as a precautionary update to their sensor coverage." He paused. "I can get confirmation from Elder in 6 hours. This is not an attack coming." "Or," Crane said, "they've been doing exactly what intelligent adversaries do, building a believable cover story through 8 months of good behavior, so that when the real move comes we're not ready." The room was quiet. Marcus looked at Crane carefully. "Victor," he said, using the first name deliberately, "you've spent 40 years in defense intelligence. You've built your entire professional life on the assumption that the right response to a potential threat is to neutralize it before it materializes. I respect that. That instinct has saved lives." He paused. "But we are not in a world where that calculus works anymore. We are in a world where acting on that instinct against the wrong target, against an Accord member vessel, against an inhabited world, against anything that the line covers, will bring down consequences that make whatever threat you think you're preventing look like nothing. So we just trust them," Crane said. "On your word. On the evidence of 8 months of sustained, verifiable, consistent behavior from a civilization that has been doing exactly what they said they would do," Marcus said. "Yes, we trust them. And if I'm wrong, which I am not, then we deal with the consequences of being wrong. But if you act on this report and you're wrong, and you are wrong, then we deal with the consequences of an attack on an Accord member that we cannot take back." Crane was silent for a long moment. "I'll verify the report," Marcus said. "Directly with Elder. 6 hours. And if the data shows what you think it shows, I'll say so, and we can have a very different conversation. But nothing moves until I've verified." The verification took 4 hours, not 6. Elder confirmed, immediately and in detail, exactly what Marcus had said. The vessel repositioning was standard defensive rotation, conducted on schedule, recorded in Accord navigation logs that were available to Earth through the official liaison channels. The threat was not real. The report was wrong. Marcus brought the confirmation back to the meeting. Crane read it. He was quiet for a long time. Then he did something Marcus had not expected. He said, "I want to resign." Marcus looked at him. "Not because I was wrong about this," Crane said. "Or not only because of that. Because I've been wrong about all of it for 8 months, and I've been wrong in a way that I couldn't see because my entire framework, everything I was trained to do, is built on assumptions that don't apply anymore. I can't keep operating in a world I don't understand the rules of. I'm a risk." The room was very quiet. Marcus said, "Your resignation is accepted if that's what you want. But I want to offer you something else first." He paused. "Come work with the liaison office. Not in intelligence, not analyzing threats. In what we're calling the integration team. The people helping UEDC develop new protocols for operating in an Accord member world. You've spent 40 years understanding how military forces think. We need someone on that team who understands what we're trying to move away from just as well as we understand what we're trying to move toward." Crane looked at him for a long moment. "You're offering a job to the guy who almost started an interstellar war," he said. I'm offering a job to someone who, when he realized he was wrong, said so and took responsibility for it, Marcus said. That's a quality I can use. Crane accepted. The incident never became public. It didn't need to. What mattered was what happened inside the room, the choice that was made, the line that was not crossed, the crisis that was handled not with weapons but with conversation and verification and the willingness to be wrong. Lily found out about it anyway. She usually did. Crane was going to strike, she said, her voice careful. He was building a case for it, Marcus said. He didn't pull a trigger. He brought a report. And when the report was shown to be wrong, he accepted it. That's actually hopeful, she said. Yes. The thing about people is that they can change, she said. Even the most afraid ones. If you give them the right reason and the right conditions. That's what the Accord believes, Marcus said. About whole species. What you're saying, it applies at every level. Yeah, she said. She was quiet for a moment. Dad, I want to do this. What you're doing. When I'm older. Pause. I want to be part of how we figure out how to be who we need to be. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Pride, yes. But also something more complex. The particular feeling of watching someone you love discover the thing they were made for. You already are, he said. You've been doing it since day one. 1 year after the arrivals first appeared in the outer solar system, Marcus Webb stood on the rooftop of his apartment building in Denver and looked up at the night sky. It was a clear October night. The Rocky Mountains were dark shapes against the western horizon. The city hummed with the particular energy of a world that was different from what it had been, not dramatically, not in ways you could see on a single Tuesday evening, but different in the way that something is different when the people in it know something they didn't know before. When the context that shapes every decision, every interaction, every ordinary morning has fundamentally, irreversibly changed. The Keth vessel, the small, graceful one that had appeared above Denver on the first day and was still there, still hovering at the edge of Earth's orbital space, was visible tonight. A steady amber light, warmer than the stars around it, patient and permanent and no longer frightening. Lily came up through the rooftop door and stood beside him. She was 17 now. In 3 months she would be accepted, though she didn't know this yet, to the University of Colorado's newly founded Accord Studies program, the first program of its kind on Earth, designed to train the next generation of liaison officers, translators, and galactic community members. She would be in the first class of 17 students. She would go on to do extraordinary things. But that was in the future. Tonight she was just Lily standing next to her father on a rooftop in Denver, looking up at the sky. Do you remember, she said, what I asked you on the day you were leaving? When I told you not to be afraid of them? I remember everything about that morning, he said. I was scared when I said it, she said. I didn't want you to know, but I was. I kept thinking, what if they hurt him? What if they take him and we never hear from him again? What if I was wrong and they're not the good kind of unknown, they're the bad kind? What made you say it anyway? He asked. She thought about it for a moment. Because being afraid and being right about what you should do aren't the same thing, she said. You can be terrified and still know what the right thing is. And when that happens, when you know what the right thing is and you're scared of it anyway, that's when it actually matters that you do it. She paused. I think that's what courage is. Not being scared. Just doing the thing anyway because you know it's right. Marcus looked at the amber light in the sky. 1 year ago, he had stood in the kitchen of this apartment and read a headline that changed the world. 1 year ago, 3 enormous shapes had moved through the outer solar system toward Earth, and the world had held its breath, and 8 billion people had looked up at the sky and felt fear. And then they had felt something else. Not all of them. Not perfectly. Not without stumbling and arguing and getting it wrong in 100 ways along the road. But enough of them, enough of the time, had felt the other thing too. The thing that was the opposite of fear, the thing that reached toward the unknown instead of away from it. That thing didn't have one name. It was curiosity and wonder and stubbornness and the specific human refusal to give up on the idea that something could be better than it was. The Keth had called it hope. We should go to the lake, Marcus said. Before the summer ends. I promised. Summer was 3 months ago, Lily said. Next summer, he said. I definitely, absolutely promise. She laughed. It was a good laugh, clean and easy, and it went up into the night air and disappeared among the stars. Deal, she said. In the weeks that followed the 1 year mark, several things happened that the world watched closely and the universe watched quietly. The 8 nations that had voted against the resolution at the UN began, one by one, to soften their positions. 2 of them requested to formally join the Accord commitment. The process for this was long and full of complications, but the direction of travel was clear. Admiral Crane published a short paper in the UEDC's internal journal, later declassified and widely read, about what it felt like to be a defense professional learning to operate in a post-contact world. It was honest and uncomfortable and full of hard truths about military culture and the psychology of threat assessment. It became required reading in the liaison office and, eventually, in defense academies on 3 continents. Dr. Priya Nair completed the first comprehensive grammar of the Keth language, a document that would later be described as one of the most important academic achievements in human history. She spent 6 months writing it, working with Elder directly via communication sessions that she described in her journal as the most intellectually fulfilling experience of my life, and also the most humbling.